Alright, hi guys. Today we are starting Chapter 2, Basic Chemistry. A lot of this should be a review of chemistry last year, so we're going to move pretty quickly through a lot of it. Here's the outline. This video is going to cover Chapter 1, Section 1 and 2. 3 and 4 will be covered at a later time. Matter. Chemical elements. Matter refers to anything that has mass and occupies space. Here on Earth, we see it in 3 states commonly: solid, liquid, and gas. And all matter, both living and non-living, is composed of basic substances called elements. Now, an element is a substance that cannot be broken down into substances with different properties, and is composed of one type of atom. 92 elements are naturally occurring on Earth. 6 of those elements make up 95% of the body weight of organisms. Those 6 elements are carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Here is a diagram showing the composition of Earth's crust. You will notice that most of it is oxygen. A lot is found in living things. On Earth, the crust itself is made up of a large percentage of silicon. But we don't contain much of that, or really any of that, in human organisms. Atoms. An atom is the smallest part of an element that displays the property of the element. An element and its atom can share the same name. It's composed of subatomic particles. There are 3 kinds: protons, neutrons, and electrons. Inside the nucleus, in that central part of the atom, are protons, which have a positive charge of 1 AMU, or a weight of 1 AMU, which is an atomic mass unit. And in that nucleus is also a neutron, which has absolutely no charge, but a very similar mass to protons. Outside that nucleus, flying around it at a very, very high rate of speed, are electrons, which are negatively charged, and they have an extremely low mass. It's low enough that whenever we're doing calculations, we can just ignore that mass completely. Here is a diagram. In the nucleus right here, we have 2 protons. Okay, our key is right over here. If we add 2 neutrons, okay, each one of these, each proton has an atomic mass of 1, each neutron has an atomic mass of 1. So our atomic mass of this atom right now is 4. If we add a couple of electrons, the negative charge of the electrons cancels out the positive charge of the protons, and this atom is said to be electrically neutral. Okay, all of the charges cancel out. Atomic number and mass number. Each element is represented by 1 or 2 letters to give it a unique atomic symbol. H for hydrogen, Na for sodium, and C for carbon. These are very common ones. Hopefully you have memorized several of these so that it will make this go a little bit quicker. The atomic number is equal to the number of protons in each atom of an element. The mass number of an atom is equal to the sum of the number of protons and neutrons in that nucleus. The atomic mass is approximately equal to the mass number. So here is a diagram showing how the atomic mass and the mass number are written very frequently. So we have our atomic symbol right here. To the left on top is the mass number, and below that is the atomic number. The periodic table. Atoms of an element are arranged horizontally by increasing atomic number in rows called periods. Atoms of an element arranged in vertical columns are called groups. They're also called families. I will use those terms interchangeably. Atoms within the same group or family share the same chemical bonding characteristics. Also note group 8 are the noble gases, and they are inert. They don't react with any other element. They keep to themselves. Atoms shown in the periodic table are electrically neutral, meaning that they have the same number of protons and electrons. Therefore, the atomic number tells you the number of electrons as well as the number of protons if you're talking about an electrically neutral atom. Here is a small portion of the periodic table. You'll notice that the transition metals have been taken out of the middle, as well as the lanthanides and the actinides. So these are just the first 36 with the transition metals taken out. You'll notice that all of these elements have similar bonding characteristics, as do all of these. These are the noble gases. They are inert. They don't react. Okay, fluorine, chlorine, and bromine, they all have similar bonding characteristics. We're going to talk about those in a little bit. Before we do, isotopes. Isotopes are atoms of the same element that have a different number of neutrons, so their atomic mass is different. Some isotopes spontaneously decay. Okay, this means that they give off a portion of their nucleus. Radioactive isotopes give off energy in the form of rays and subatomic particles. They can be helpful or harmful. Carbon-14 is an example of a radioactive isotope. It has been used to examine reactions in photosynthesis. Scientists will introduce carbon-14 to a plant, and the plant will then take it in through photosynthesis, convert it into a sugar, and scientists can track how that carbon-14 moves through the organism over time. Low levels of radiation can be used to treat different conditions. Thyroid issues can be treated with low levels of radiation. Also, like PET scans and CAT scans can be used low levels of radiation. High levels of radiation are sometimes used on our food sources, such as these peaches on the left side of your screen. Okay, high levels of radiation are exposed to those fruits and vegetables to kill bacteria and fungi that live on the surface of those organisms, the surface of those fruits and vegetables, and this helps preserve them so that they don't go bad as quickly. High levels of radiation are also used in medical treatments, such as cancer treatment. Here on the right side, we see someone having a radiation treatment done on their brain. Electrons and energy. Electrons are attracted to the positively charged nucleus, thus it takes energy to hold electrons in place. It takes energy to push them away and keep them in their own shell. The more distant the shell, the more energy it takes to hold it into place. Electrons have energy due to their relative position, or their potential energy, and those electrons determine the chemical behavior of the atoms that they are in. The distribution of electrons. The Bohr model is a useful way to visualize electron location. Electrons revolve around the nucleus in energy shells. For atoms with atomic numbers of 20 or less, the following rules apply. Whenever you get more, a larger element with atomic number of 20 or more, the rules get a little bit shifty. We're only going to focus on the first 20 elements, so these rules will apply. The first energy shell can hold up to 2 electrons, and each shell after that can hold up to 8. And the lower shells are filled before the higher ones. These rules cover most of the biological significant elements. Okay, so the ones that we're going to talk about in this class. Valence electrons. They are the outermost electrons. They're the ones on the very, very outside of our atom. The valence shell is important because it determines many of the atom's chemical properties. Now, all elements, all atoms, they want what's called a full outer shell, and most of them that is a outer shell with 8 electrons in it, which gives rise to this octet rule, which states that the outermost shell is most stable when it has 8 electrons. Now, there is an exception to this. If it is a small atom, like hydrogen or helium, it is full whenever it has 2 electrons in its outermost shell. The number of electrons in an atom's valence shell determines whether the atom gives up, accepts, or shares electrons to acquire 8 electrons in that outer shell. atoms that have their valence shells filled with electrons tend to be chemically stable. Atoms that do not have a full outer shell are chemically reactive. They will go through chemical reactions to get those electrons. Here are some Bohr models of atoms. All right, you'll notice that the symbol is in the middle, representing all of the protons and the neutrons in the nucleus, and the outer rings, these are electrons. All right, section 2, molecules and compounds. A molecule is two or more elements bonded together. It is the smallest part of a compound that retains its chemical properties, like sodium chloride, that is table salt. Okay, a compound is a molecule containing at least two different elements bonded together, so like carbon dioxide, water, glucose. Those are ones that we're going to talk about frequently in this class. A formula tells you the number of each kind of atom in that molecule. So C6H12O6 is glucose, and that tells me that there are 6 carbon atoms, 12 hydrogen atoms, and 6 oxygen atoms in that single molecule. So here's just another diagram showing what I just said on the previous slide. 6 carbon atoms, 12 hydrogen atoms, and 6 oxygen atoms. And this is all one molecule. Chemical bonding. Bonds that exist between atoms and molecules contain energy. Bonds between atoms are caused by the interaction between the electrons in the outermost energy shells, those valence shells. The process of bond formation is called a chemical reaction. There are 2 types of bonding. The first is ionic bonding. An ion is an atom that has lost or gained an electron. An ionic bond forms when electrons are transferred from one atom to another atom, and their oppositely charged ions are attracted to each other. So an example of this would be sodium chloride. Salts are solid substances that usually separate and exist as individual ions in water. So here is a sodium atom, or this is a sodium atom, and a chlorine atom. Okay, this sodium has an electron right here that it wants to get rid of, because it's easier to get rid of that one electron than it is to try to get 7 more to fill this shell. It's going to give this atom, or this electron, to this chlorine atom over here, and the sodium will become positively charged, the chlorine will become negatively charged because it has an extra electron, and they will bond together because of that. The positive of the sodium attracts the negative of the chlorine. Here is a model of what those atoms look like, what those ions look like. They form cube structures. And here's just a diagram of table salt, which is the most common ionic bonding example. Another type of bonding is covalent. Covalent bonds result when 2 atoms share electrons, so each atom has an octet of electrons in its outer shell. In the case of hydrogen, the outer shell is complete when it contains 2 electrons. Remember, that's because it's that smaller atom that only has a valence shell that can hold 2 electrons. In a nonpolar covalent bond, electrons are shared equally between the atoms. So these are examples of covalently bonded molecules that are nonpolar. They are shared equally. Notice that they can share 1 pair of electrons, or 2, or up to 3. Types of covalent bonds. In a polar covalent bond, electrons are shared unequally. Okay, an example of this is water. Electronegativity is the ability of an atom to attract electrons toward itself in a chemical bond. In water, the oxygen atom is more electronegative than the hydrogen atoms, and the bonds are therefore polar. That is because oxygen has more electrons in its outermost shell, so it can pull more of that electronegativity toward itself. So here's the partial negative charge of oxygen, and then the hydrogens down here are partially positive. All right, that is it for sections 1 and 2, guys. If you have any questions, please feel free to go back and watch the video again, or ask me in class tomorrow, or if you just need an answer right now, go ahead and shoot me an email.